All right, welcome back. Let's get into our connective tissue in terms of bone. This is one of my favorite tissue types in the human body. Mainly because I studied it for my doctorate, but it's pretty cool in my opinion. It does pretty cool stuff. So it is a hard connective tissue, which makes sense because it needs to support our weight in relationship to gravity and movement. So it has to be hard compared to the other things. The cells living inside this connective tissue are called osteocytes. So osteo, bone, right? Anytime you hear the word or prefix osteo, instantly think of bone, okay? And these are living inside a mineralized matrix. This matrix is strong, has good rigidity, so it's relatively stiff, right? And it's made up of kind of two main components here in terms of the chemicals found in it. An element and an inorganic element, which means organic elements is something, that's carbon-based, you found in nature. I mean, technically inorganic here is found in nature in our bodies, but our technical organic just means it has carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, so hydrogen, so forth. But organic substance here is collagen fibers, so these are proteins, right? So another type of collagen fibers are found in making the bone matrix. Then you have an inorganic part of it, which is your hydroxyapatite. This is a crystal, oddly enough. So your bones are made of crystals, not diamonds. That would be a lot better, but we're still made of crystals, which is made up of calcium and phosphate. So this is where the calcium is needed for good bone health. It's not in the organic part with the collagen fibers, but it's needed in the inorganic part via the hydroxyapatite crystals. Now, like I said, we have osteocytes located in the bone. They are living in what's called these lacunae spaces. Lacunae just means little space, which lacunae is a common term in a lot of other tissues that have cells living inside them. Remember in the previous video, part 3, with the cartilage, there's chondrocytes living in lacunae themselves. So osteocytes also live in them. But these ones have a nice blood supply, because there's blood vessels flowing through these spaces to supply all the cells living in them with blood, nutrients, and so forth. Mainly from the fact that the diffusion cannot occur in bone matrix, unlike cartilage matrix where diffusion does occur. So there are two different types of bone matrix. Spongy bone, which is also called cancellous bone or compact bone or cortical bone. Spongy bone is also known by trabecular. I call it trabecular, so if you hear me use that term, I mean spongy bone or cancellous bone. Cortical is pretty common. So, as always, here's a table of what we mean by that. So, spongy bone or trabecular bone, it has a lattice-like structure or it looks spongy. There's pores in it. It really provides a scaffold for strength. And what it does is it provides a place where when you jump or you walk, when that bone hits the joint, it will bend a little bit and transfer all of the force into the nice thick part of the bone, which is the cortical bone, where it will carry more of the load, and you have more organized, ring-like structures. Lamellae is what it's called here, versus the cortical bone. Trabecular bone don't really have any sort of organized ring-like structure or any lamellae. But they both have osteocytes in them. The bone matrix themselves just look slightly different. The cortical bone is a dense, irregular, elastic connective tissue here. So blood, remember, we said it's a connective tissue as well, so we'll talk about that here. It's living in the fluid matrix, so that doesn't have any fibers, so it's not really attaching to anything. So that's the unique thing about this one. It's not attached to any sort of extracellular matrix. So it's there and designed to move through the vessels. Some of the blood cells can, even move through the blood vessels themselves out into the other parts of tissues, right, which is normal and healthy. But these ones are able to live on their own, not attached to anything, right? So you can have, these are typically called formed elements. So red cells, which are, erythrocytes, red blood cells, white blood cells, right, which encapsulate multiple different types of cells, macrophages, T cells, B cells, and then, of course, platelets. There's hematopoietic tissue. So this is different than the blood, okay? They are related, intimately related, but different. Because hematopoietic tissue, it's the tissue that actually produces our blood cells, okay? These are found in our bones, typically our long bones. So you can have like a red marrow, which is found in the trabecular region of the bone, the spongy bone, and then you have yellow marrow, which has more fat in it, found in the more cavity cortical section of the long bone. So like your thigh, your femur is a really good example of that. So a lot earlier in development for children, they have more red than yellow, and then that slowly switches out, especially when we talk about maturation of the immune system. So the hematopoietic tissue is differentiating. It holds hematopoietic stem cells that differentiate into erythrocytes, platelets, macrophages, all the hematopoietic stem cell lineage. And we'll talk about blood and the cardiovascular system after fall break here. I think it starts in chapter 1, so we'll jump around a little bit after fall break, but we'll get into what we mean by all these terms. So here's a nice overview of a graphical overview of the connective tissue types. So we have loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, fluid connective tissue, and that kind of cuts it off a little bit here, but the red blood cells, and then our supportive connective tissue, cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, and then our cortical bone down here. This is in the textbook here, so this is pulled from it, so you can always go back and reference it. Now, muscle tissue here is different, right? So we talked about epithelial tissue, we talked about muscle, connective tissue, Now we're going into muscle tissue. So this is different than the other two. So the characteristics here is it's undergoing contractions, i.e. shortening, producing a force, and this is in order to move the body and pump the blood, right? So it's for movement and pumping blood. So there's 3 different types: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Now, skeletal muscle is attached to the skeleton and other connective tissue. It's striated, which you can kind of see here in the figure here, and it's voluntary movement. You have to think about it. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. It is also striated, but it's involuntary. You don't think about it, okay? Now, smooth muscle, it has more tubular structures, as we're seeing here, right? So striated, not striated. It's more of a simple structure here. It's kind of found underneath your skin, around hairs, get your goosebumps, right? It's found around arteries, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. It's all involuntary. You don't think about that either. So only one of these muscle tissues do you actually have conscious control over, and that's your skeletal muscle. I mean, I guess if you're moving your arms and legs in your sleep, that's unconscious, but you get the idea. So skeletal muscle here, movement of the body, attached to bone or other connective tissue, and it's striated, right? Long and cylindrical, many nuclei in the cell, right? So it's multinucleated, which is, interesting to think about. Again, we're moving through this quickly because we'll hit all of these tissues up in their own chapters, okay? We have cardiac muscle, pumps the blood, still striated, only found in the heart, intercalated discs, and so forth, multinucleated as well. And then we have smooth muscle, which is not striated, right? Maybe around your wall of the small intestine is another location, stomach, a lot of other locations that you don't necessarily think about. All right. The last tissue type here that we'll talk about is the nervous tissue. So neurons and glial cells. So specifically neurons here. So these are our nerves. Their job is to produce electrical signals called action potentials. They're electrochemical signals that again we'll learn about, but this will be in the spring, right? When we talk about the nervous system and how it regulates bodily functions. But neurons have three main parts: a cell body, which contains the nucleus, an axon, which is the cell process, or basically a fancy word of a thing that sticks out from the cell, and it conducts the electrical signals away from the cell body, right? Usually there's only one per neuron, but that's necessarily true because we have, there might be examples of here, like the multipolar ones. They can kind of see it, but usually there's always examples of where it's not. Dendrites, on the other hand, these are other cell processes sticking out of the neuron, but these are receiving impulse signals, right? So the signal that a neuron receives goes through the dendrites, kind of past the cell body through down the axon. There are three main types of neurons: multipolar, bipolar, pseudo-unipolar. Yeah, I guess you could also like include the fourth here and say unipolar, right? So pseudo-unipolar, you have the cell body kind of protruded off and disconnected a little bit from the dendrites through the axon, right? So it's kind of disjointed here. Unipolar here, you have, you can have dendrites here on the cell body like this is, right? This is unipolar, with then one axon going away. Multipolar, you have, kind of multiple branching out here and multiple dendrites coming in. Bipolar, you have, dendrite coming in and axon going out. Where the cell body's in between the dendrites and the axon, right? So where multipolar, the dendrites are kind of directly branched off of the cell body. Bipolar, it's like a specific branch, singular branch away from the cell body. Now, there are other nervous tissues outside of neurons, and I mentioned them, but they're glia cells or glial cells. Their main job here is to support the neuron cells, specifically in the brain, the spinal cord, and other locations, right? So they're there to nourish, protect, and insulate. So there's astrocytes, maintain the blood barrier. There's ependymal cells, which kind of line the spinal cord, producing your cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF, right, which is like a lubricant. You have oligodendrites, which are myelinate the central nervous system cells. This speeds up the electrical signal. Then you have microglial cells, which is the immune cells found in the brain. So these are fighting pathogens that get past that blood-brain barrier. And this is all in the central nervous system. When we talk about peripheral nervous system, which is like the neurons outside of your spinal column and brain, you have satellite cells, which are like oligodendrocytes, but they're just surrounding the cell body. And then you have Schwann cells that myelate the neurons as well. Again, very similar to oligodendrocytes. So here's, again, our bullet point examples or table examples of the different neuron cells that we have. So multipolar neurons, pseudo-unipolar neurons, like the glia cells in the spinal cord. And then these are the ones in the textbook that are provided here. Okay, we'll pause. I'm jumping back and forth. I'm sorry. We'll end the video here and we'll continue on with tissue membranes.